Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar. I'd first like to do a little bit of a sound check. Can we get a thumbs up that everyone can hear? Okay, fantastic. This is preparing for the possibility of ICE enforcement action on campus. My name is Michelle Allman. I am the past chair for the Knowledge Community for International Student Services, Student and Scholar Services. And I am joined here by our subject matter experts, Dan Berger and Carrie E. Doyle, both of Green and Spiegel, and they will give some more detailed introductions in a few minutes. We are going to be talking about this as a discussion, a deeper dive into an article that Dan and Steve Yellor wrote about this topic. Some institutions already have procedures in place for visitors on campus, and it's very clear. And the institutions have done a good job of spreading that knowledge across campus constituencies. Others may not. And so this is a chance for us to talk about some of those differences, distinguish between what might be a routine visit and what might be an enforcement action. So we have a number of pre-submitted questions as well, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for the Q&A to address those questions, as well as other things that might come up in the chat. So do feel free to engage with the chat, and we have some wonderful NAFSA staffers paying attention to that to guide us through that discussion. So thank you so much to Dan and Carrie for their time and their expertise, and I will turn it over to them.
All right. Well, I guess I'm unmuted, so maybe I'll start. But then, in no particular order, very nice to be here. Carrie and I are colleagues at Green and Spiegel. I'll let her introduce herself and her background, which is very relevant to what we're talking about. Wanted to just generally share that there is no one size fits all. I think what we're trying to do here is raise ideas of important issues that should be considered when you're coming up with your campus plan, and but to really make it fit. Obviously, many of you are in different political situations on your campus. You may be able to be. I've been to campuses where we don't talk about certain things, and campuses where we talk about everything. But in general, I think the big picture is to have a plan, to think things out, to not be working in a reactionary way, and to talk all across campus about with all stakeholders about what the protocols are going to be if there is a campus visit, and in particular, how or if you're going to be supporting people who are living off campus, who are part of your community. Second, I think is that in difficult times, I think it's really important to have regular communication. I can't tell you how often I talk to somebody and they say, "Oh, I heard from Reddit, or I heard from my friend, or I heard on Facebook, or, whatever." There's a lot of rumors going around, and I think the only hope of us all coming together as a campus is to be working with common facts and common understanding as much as possible. So town halls, regular communications, all that stuff is really good. I guess three would be thinking about how to support people in particular who are in vulnerable immigration situations. And there are a lot more of them. Carrie and I have been doing this for a while. When I first started practicing, most of the people we saw on campuses were on, F visas, H visas, J visas, green cards. Now, as you all know, there are a lot of people on campuses who have asylum pending, or were parole, or have TPS and may lose it, or on DACA and may lose it, or are fully undocumented. So we need to think about how to support them and try to move them, connect them with legal services if possible, to move them into status, or at least to make a preparedness plan. Um, and uh, and I think the last thing, just in terms of a preamble here, is to think about the fact that there is a real shortage of legal services. Carrie and I were chatting about this last night online. There's no, again, no magic formula to this, but I think to the extent that each campus can do this, you want to try. We saw this with the SEVIS terminations last spring, that there just weren't enough lawyers who know what an F1 visa is to be, and who know how to go into court to really advise all the students. So we want to get information out there. We want to leverage the International Student Resource Center and try to have each campus connect with services as much as possible. So I'll stop there with those big picture thoughts and let Carrie introduce herself and say a few words.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I want to apologize in advance. Our roofer showed up early, a day early, which never happens, I guess, but it did today. So apologies for any loud noises. I tried to find the quietest corner that I could. Happy to be here. As Dan mentioned, worked in the nonprofit sector and in private practice for more than 20 years. And then I was with the Biden administration and I was general counsel at ICE with DHS. And then I was deputy general counsel, excuse me, at the Department of Homeland Security, and then briefly served as an immigration judge before that came sort of crashing down under this administration and um, rejoined private practice with Green and Spiegel. So I do have some insight into enforcement issues and that type of thing to the extent that there's any consistency from prior administrations. We've seen a very different ICE, very different DHS, a really very different government overall in this administration. I want to emphasize something Dan said, which is to have a plan. Because I think the most challenging thing with all of this is to not have a plan, not think out how you would handle it, to not put tools in people's hands so they can handle any situation that arises. Not only because to be unprepared and something someone might do just out of instinct or without thinking could actually get themselves into a bit of trouble. Um, or could create more problems rather than mitigating the situation. Um, and we'll go into some, I think, details with the question and answer, but whether it's within your group, because we've talked to some campuses with their groups, like maybe the English department, like certain departments, and figuring out within the department how to respond, and also as a university as a whole. But to have those conversations and then raise them up the chain so that there's a clear and consistent plan for things moving forward. And I think that's the best thing we can do. And also to Dan's point, to have some folks on speed dial or have a plan for who you would reach out with in your area. And I clearly understand there's not enough support and legal services, but there are a lot of people out there right now providing, know your rights presentations, providing at least, generic trainings and information, even if it's the little red cards that you can get your hands on pretty easily and print out so that people know their rights on a little card, which is super. And we've seen really an upswing in people understanding what their rights are and attempting to express them. And that is really just encouraging to my mind, honestly, despite everything that there's so many people and even there are a couple of videos like from Minnesota in particular, but other ones of the even out of New York from early on last year of the people saying not opening their door, saying I'm not answering questions, I'm calling my lawyer. Like it warms a lawyer's heart to see people take that on board. So I think that we'll answer some, again, have more specificity as we move on. But I think planning, thinking ahead, planning, and having a very clear plan. I guess I'll just close with this. being an attorney. I'm a litigator. Like I work for ICE, have dealt with ICE like for many, many years. And whether it's going into an interview with them or another law enforcement agency, um, it's intimidating. Okay. So even those of us that do this for a living, I have to plan it out ahead of time, know what I'm going to say. I have a plan going in because when you do things off the cuff, they're not usually what you want as a result. So it's super important to think ahead. And so I totally appreciate those of you that are just like trying to do your job, your regular job, and then having to deal with knowing your rights and standing up to people in law enforcement is super hard. But the more we can all band together and understand that people do have rights, they have the right to express them, and again, to have a plan, the better we'll all be in handling a situation without it getting, complicated or difficult or resolving in a way that's, the best possible resolution. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. You mentioned some of the things that we've seen in the news about, opening a door or not. Do you have any case studies or examples from the news of what a campus visit has looked like?
Well, I think
I
yeah.
Go ahead,
Go
Dan.
ahead. No, please. Yeah.
Oh no, I was gonna say I haven't seen videos about a campus visit. Have you, Dan? I've
No, I
just
mean, I think there's different kinds of campus visits, and maybe that's worth mentioning. Like, immigration officers do come onto campuses regularly for H-1B site visits, for STEM OPT site visits. Sometimes even I have a client that's having a J1 site visit next week, which I haven't seen a lot of. So th but you need to be prepared for that, and you also need to be prepared for what's going to happen when it starts to get out on Reddit that immigration is on campus. But in terms of actual enforcement actions on campus, I think there've been very few.
don't say that too loudly.
Okay, yeah, knocking wood with both hands. Yeah.
Yes, thank
Um,
you. Thank you for
yeah,
that. But that helps us position and understand the scale of what we might be looking at.
yeah.
Thank
I
you.
mean, I think if I could just say, I mean, I think the campus actions we saw really the main ones we saw with some publicity were earlier last year with the arrest of Khalid and also, Rumeysa Ozturk, like those sort of well publicized that I think the administration purposely did in a very dramatic way as
Mhm.
to be able to um, send a message to people. And I know some of those were like people in people in office house, what the rules and challenges are. And, I know on a campus, even if you have certain rules that say about a dorm or campus housing, like even without ICE, you have issues with like people getting in who shouldn't, right? People leaving the door open, people like, putting something in there so they can get in and out. And so we've seen a couple of those. I've heard of a couple of things like that, like ICE sort of getting into a hallway just because they were let in or walked in with somebody else or that have you. But I think again, um, I think for the campuses to within yourselves and then to the need to raise up is if ICE shows up for a J um, investigation or H-1B or coming to look at your I-9s, for example, like those you'll get notice, good communication with everybody to let them know what's going on, to be prepared for that particular situation. I think that's, you can plan ahead. And then I think also communicating, well, what if ICE shows up unexpectedly for something and understanding who can be called, what everybody's responsibilities are. And I'm a big proponent of signage, right? There may be places where you want to have signage, and we can talk about that a little bit because it's a lot easier for people to say, "Put the sign, seems you can't come in," or someone they call, be like, "Wait here, I'm calling my supervisor." so the more support we can give people in responding so they A, understand how to respond, and B, there's clear lines of communication, and that they're not feeling like they have to stand alone against a bunch of people with potentially masks, but certainly in bulletproof vests with weapons, it's
Mhm.
and badges. It's intimidating.
Mhm.
It
Thank you.
is. And oh, sorry, Michelle. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a comment in the chat about Columbia University in February. I think our firm did a town hall there right after that. Just so I'm not going to say anything that's not public, but you know, just in general, if a I think it's a good point. Like simple plans in my mind, and Carrie, you can weigh in on this. But in general, simple plans are good because if you make a plan and then a year later you there's an ice visit, you don't want to be remembering a complicated plan, no matter how good your training is. So simple plans are figuring out have a 24/7 number that people can call for support. And I think the simple plan is also if it's a government agent who wants to get into a private space on campus, somebody who knows what they're doing should be doing that. It shouldn't be you. So if somebody shows up at Columbia and says they're NYPD or says that they're from the public health department when they want to inspect the the flu in the dining hall, that all sounds very innocuous, but you all and ordinary people on campus don't know what credentials look like. They don't know if that person really is from the public health department. They don't know what the parameters are of what each different government agency is allowed to do and see. So call somebody. Sometimes that's public safety, sometimes it's general counsel, but figure out who can come and then just very, very simple. Just say, look, I'm not authorized to do this. Our campus protocol is to call somebody who knows what they're doing. You can just say that in simple words. And they're going to come and make sure that this isn't some imposter that's trying to get into a private space, even if it is but yeah, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say because I think the plans you and I have seen or heard about with some of the universities and colleges we've talked about have been simple and have a situation where somebody is assigned this duty. So maybe the receptionist at the front hall, or maybe the person in the entryway will be the first encounter, but everyone knows you call public safety or you call someone at general counsel, or there's a set person, there's a set plan, and then they can say, you need to wait, I'm calling, I don't know anything, I'm calling, you need to wait. And then yes, to the extent that I don't know if you want to get into the private public space now, but okay, so uh,
Yes, that'd be
okay,
great.
super. Okay, super. So the basic rule is that private space versus public spaces, and whether it's a college or university or hospital or what have you, any facility, any organization, can look at and establish and evaluate what spaces they want to be public and what spaces they want to be private. So there's a hospital in Boston where every time you go in, you have to check in. You can't just walk in and wander around the hospital ever. And so I would say after that check-in, everything behind there's private. You only get in with permission, for example. Whereas public library, you might be able to just go in and wander around because it's public. And so I think that hopefully by now, because we've been talking about this now for about a year, most schools have given this some thought to decide what parts of their campus are public and what parts of the campus are private. A lot of campuses are generally open, like you can go to the quad or you could go to, the student center relatively openly. There's some schools not. Like when I was looking at colleges with my son, we wanted to pop in at Fordham and they were like, nope, you don't have an appointment. You're not allowed on campus. So we couldn't even get on the campus. So there has to be some decision making of what space is public and what space is private. Why do we care about that? Why do we care? Because there's different rules, different rights that apply, whether it's public space or private space. Law enforcement officers do have rules in both places, and they don't get like to be, despite what some in the administration might say, they don't have complete free reign even in a public space to stop people or question people, but they have a lot more ability to do that. Private space, no. The only way a law enforcement officer gets into a private space is what do you all think? And the easiest way they get in is permission. Someone gives them permission, right? So you get pulled over by the police and they're like, "Oh, you don't mind if I just search your car, right?" Okay? You go, "Sure." You just gave them permission. If you said no, they could not get in there without a warrant or some very specific things they have to meet under the Constitution. Same for private space. So the housing is private. You can't get in without permission. A dorm, maybe some of the libraries are private, maybe the classrooms are private. Those spaces can only be entered either with permission, so someone that has the authority to do that has given them permission to enter, or they have a warrant. There's a little bit of a controversy about the warrants. I would just say and understand and follow the standard warrant rule, which is that for a private space, law enforcement officer, be it ICE, Customs Border Protection, somebody else under the DHS umbrella, or a police officer generally can only enter private space with a signed judicial warrant. Judicial warrant. So it'll say something district court, it'll say court at the top, and it'll have judge so and so at the bottom. The CBP's, Customs and Border Protection, and ICE, they get to create their own warrants. They're called administrative warrants, so they sign them themselves. So they basically all get signed because they sign them themselves. But for private space, they must have a signed judicial warrant. And so that's why we've been talking a lot in the last year as we're dealing with this really increased ICE and CBP enforcement, is talking about private space and public space. And this is also where I think signage can be very helpful, where it will say, this area is private, and the person at the front is told, just make them wait, and this is the number you call, or this is the person you call who will come and handle it and is trained to handle it. So that's a huge conversation that I think each school has to have, should have, and decisions should be made over which space is going to be public, which space is going to be private, if there's a mix, on the campus. And people's constitutional rights vary depending on whether it's a private space or a public space.
Hey, Carrie, there was a question in the chat. I wonder if you could just really quickly address that. Is there any kind of compliance issue by saying, will you please wait? I need to contact campus safety. Or is there any kind of time limit? Do you have to respond immediately?
Nope. Nope. I mean, they're gonna be like, "Oh, come on." Like what happened, I think Columbia's, they were told some story, and I don't even think they got stopped at the door, but they told some story about trying to find a missing child. They'll do things like be like, "Oh, we need to get in. It's really urgent." And you can see there have been some very good videos posted on social media. There's one from Minnesota in particular I like. It's a woman and a man that are the law enforcement officers, and they may be CBP actually. And there's a young guy inside, and he has one of those metal door with screen that he doesn't open. And they'll often be like, well, he'll say, "I want to see a judicial warrant." And he had his little card and he was reading and saying, "I want to see a judicial warrant. I'm not letting you without a judicial warrant. I'm not answering questions." That's the next thing, is we need people not to answer questions without a lawyer. Take the Fifth Amendment. That means you don't have to answer questions.
Thank
Give
you.
them your name, your real name, so we can find you if something does happen to you. But other than that, be like, "I'm not answering questions. Need to talk to my lawyer." Like, you absolutely have that right. And it's very hard not to do it because they're very persuasive and they're very intimidating. And they're going to be like, "Okay, well, we're just going to get a warrant. You might as well just let us in now." be like, no, I'm not allowed to do anything. Like, I'm waiting for my supervisor, or I'm waiting for campus security, campus security. That's why if there's a clear plan and people understand it, and there's a lot sign by them saying it's private, like, see, it's private. Like, I don't know anything. I'm waiting for the people, and then
Mhm.
just that can really help. But no, they have to wait. Like you say, no, they can't come in. They'll stand there and heckle you. They'll heckle you. And when I do Know Your Rights presentation, sometimes I'll be like, have people practice or like be like, go home and practice with your family, like getting heckled and being like, nope, nope, sorry, no, I'm not going to answer questions. Because no, like they're sitting there all day if they want.
Mhm. Thank you.
Constitutional right does not have a time limit on it. It is forever.
That is clear. Dan, the next question is for you. You mentioned in your preamble accessing legal services and how sometimes that can be difficult. And so and it's resource intensive as well. So I'm wondering if you have seen any scalable models that you've seen work for institutions that don't have their own law school or significant funding to support immigration legal assistance.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what President Obama used to say about climate policy, like it's got to be an all of the above. There's probably no one thing that's going to do the trick. But uh, in general, I think I do want to highlight the new International Student Resource Center. That's a start. It's a free service. It is NAFSA is involved in this, but basically they are trying to help point people in the right direction, and they do have vetted attorneys who are available for free to chat and help try to make sure that at least you're asking the right questions. I think number two is just trying to see what's available. I just talked to a law school clinic today at a well-resourced private university, and there's a community college down the road, and the law school immigration lawyers at the immigration clinic. Sorry, my cat's tail is in the picture. But twice a year, the law school faculty who are really crackerjack walk down the road to the community college, and there are 300 students in complicated immigration situations, and they do a presentation and try to help let them know about accredited legal services. Sometimes it's just making friends with the with a nonprofit nearby. Sometimes it's trying to leverage, employment-based attorneys that are making money from the university to provide services. And sometimes it's fundraising with alums. I think, when you think about the cost of even a really good immigration paralegal who can triage and prepare a case to send to a nonprofit, so it's fully baked instead of having them spend a lot of time thinking about it, is good. And if you can fundraise quietly among alums and have a couple of them contribute to that, that's a possibility. But again, no magic formula at all. You just want to see what's around, what kind of money you can put together, and try to have as many options as possible.
Thank you very much. I think
Yeah.
oh, go ahead,
Can I
Carrie.
say something?
Yes,
Sorry.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, no, just because I mean, I think Massachusetts has been particularly good at pulling the community together, working together, having kind of a team first approach. And I think this was true with Trump one and with Trump two. And like we've got a habeas project, for example. So for people who get arrested by ICE or CBP, that includes the criminal bar. Like it's called Mass Association of Defense Lawyers, and because they were super excited to get involved and they know how to file habeas petitions that a lot of immigration lawyers don't. And we're matching them up and we have a whole volunteer set up and everything. And we did get a little bit of funding for someone to help organize it, but a lot of it's just like people coming together, making creating bridges, creating community. So is there like a faith community maybe that has some lawyers willing to volunteer or that could spend a lot of money, or could even just communicate. Your criminal defense lawyers might not know immigration, but you can coordinate with
Yeah.
immigration lawyers associations. Like, this is a time where we need to be building community and like supporting each other. And again, we've been super successful and have gotten, you know, hundreds, literally hundreds of habeas petitions filed in the last year as a result. And again, it was like people who want to help but don't have the knowledge, and the people with the knowledge that maybe they don't have the time or the ability, but to do them themselves. But connecting them together and working together with the community has been, I think, has been pretty successful. So. Um, again, if you don't have outreach, like, make friends with legal services, make friends if there's any bigger firms and medium-sized firms in the area. Most of them do pro bono. Some states require a certain number of pro bono hours. And a lot of people that, see injustices happening want to be able to help, but they don't necessarily, know how. And you can organize know your rights presentations pretty easily. People can even do it by video from other states if you've got no one there locally. The little red cards are available online. You can print those out and hand them out. Like, walk around campus, walk around town, hand out little red cards, or put piles in a bunch of the businesses around. Small businesses can put up signs about know your rights and things too. So I guess I would just encourage everyone to kind of get out of your bubble a little, and not just feel defeated. Be like, oh, we don't have any money. Oh well, you know what I mean? Like there's people out there that can help. And I mean, Trump won like a couple of people through our immigrants rights group, and almost every state has an immigrants rights group. Particularly if you're in a blue state, they all have folks that work usually in the governor's office, that do like citizenship and immigration kind of work that you can work with. We have the Office of Refugee and Immigrants here, but in Mass, but some of the others. States have comes in slightly different ways. But I know, I've been to the meetings, I have friends in there, and a lot of states have people in their governor's offices or other statewide offices that do like citizenship work and inclusion work and that type of stuff. Almost every state has an immigrants rights organization. Almost every state has an ACLU. A lot of states have ACLUs. This is when we need to be, working together. So, reach out. And I just want to encourage you, because I think with also with, more people together, we can make a bigger impact and help more people, and hopefully get, connected to people being able to provide either pro bono or low bono kind of legal assistance to the people who need it. And I do have a pitch about legal assistance, Michelle, when we get to that point.
Okay.
too.
Yeah, and Michelle, if I could, I just want to piggyback on something that Carrie just said. Keep in mind that immigration is federal law. So if you do happen to be in a rural area and there just aren't a lot of immigration lawyers around, as an immigration lawyer, I'm licensed in Massachusetts. I can't advise any of you on a divorce or a contract in New Hampshire or Texas, but I can do immigration law, federal law all over the country. So if you I've seen a few situations of sister cities almost where you have a school that's in a place where there just aren't a lot of immigration lawyers around, but you try to connect with somebody who is. Like I've done some work in Wyoming, and in our firm has done some work in North Dakota. Like, just see who you can find, especially through your alumni network, and just do whatever you can.
Thank you. All of these are really great points. Um, I think that where a lot of advisors, those of us in international education, have concerns is related to compliance liability, because we are not attorneys, and we don't necessarily know where our responsibilities lie. So, how can institutions strike the right balance between supporting their students but also avoiding legal exposure for themselves as staff or for faculty or others on campus?
I can start that one, Dan. this is why you have a plan. This is why you think ahead. And again, even if it's, I've seen some people that are like, my administration hasn't been super supportive, but like, can your department do something? Can the, maybe the English department's interested, they can meet and kind of do something and think through, even just if you're just talking about it and thinking through how you would handle something. Because, for example, if they come in and they're let in by somebody and they're like, we're looking for Bob, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, and someone's like, Bob, run. You now have some legal liability by assisting someone to avoid law enforcement, to avoid immigration enforcement. That's not the way to go, because then you will end up with potentially some, liability if you're hiding someone or helping someone evade immigration or law enforcement. But please don't mix that up with someone, including you, exercising your constitutional rights. So even as an individual to say, I'm not answering your questions, you have an absolute right to do that. Or this is private space, I'm not allowing you, I don't give you permission to enter. You have the absolute right to do that if it's a private space. Now, a supervisor or a manager, someone higher up the chain could give them permission, and then, all bets are kind of off. But that's why it's about understanding your rights, understand everyone else understanding their rights, and expressing those rights, as opposed to playing cat and mouse. Because you get into that and you are gonna be subject to some liability. And I think, again, saying wait, or if you have a plan to say wait, I need to talk to someone who knows what's going on. I think, 99.99%, like, you're not gonna run into issues with that kind of approach. Again, you're protected constitutionally, and even if you say no, or this is private, I don't want you in, and they force their way through, there can sometimes be remedies, legal remedies to that, that happening. So even just saying this is private, I don't give you permission, even if they violate that, the fact that you stood up and said that and was very clear about that really can assist. But you do want to be careful to not help someone evade, advise someone to evade, like, drive someone away from an incident, like those kind of. That's why, like, responding kind of in the moment can get you into some trouble if because your instinct might be, I want to help people. You have to be a little bit careful. And again, why we would encourage, even if it's just amongst your peers or your one group, if the school's not being very proactive, can be super helpful.
Yeah, and planning ahead. Just to two little footnotes on that. One is just talk to your general counsel. Like, make sure you're on the same page. Like, we have a couple of articles for NACUA, the Association of College and University Attorneys, where we try to explain to them your situation as international student and scholar advisors, that you are dealing with legal issues all day. And yet many of you are not lawyers, and how does that play out? But um, figure out what your school will do. Will they back you up if you make certain decisions? Will they, do they not want you to get involved in certain situations? And that's it's really helpful to have those conversations ahead of time to make sure you're on the same page. Number two, in terms of being proactive, is the desire to help the people you care about so much, the students and scholars at risk. Is really tremendous, as Carrie said, especially in the moment. But really, one really, really good way to help people is to talk to them before there's a problem. So, anybody who has a complicated immigration situation, if at all possible, should make an appointment at a nonprofit, or talk to an immigration lawyer, or talk to a clinic. And about two things, really. One is there any way to make their immigration situation better? Some of them have never gotten good legal advice. Some of them may have a pathway forward, and if they can be proactive, they can do it. Much harder to fix things once you're already detained or in immigration court. Number two so one thing is to try to see if there's any pathway forward. The other thing is to talk about an individualized plan. the majority of people on your campus probably are documented and need to carry their documents, even if honestly, even if they're US citizens, I think everybody should carry some kind of evidence of their immigration status these days. But if somebody is undocumented or is in a fragile situation, they can have a more individualized plan. And if you want to help somebody, you can help them make the appointment. You can help go with them so they have a sounding board so they have somebody to talk to afterwards. And that is hugely helpful.
Great. Thank you so much. Looking ahead, and this will also be an opportunity to give any kind of final thoughts or wrap up before we get into the Q&A, any points that you wanted to bring out. But looking ahead, if enforcement activity increases or becomes more visible, what is going to distinguish the campus that responds effectively from those that struggle with that? And what kind of early warning signs, if any, should campus leaders be watching out for? Carrie, any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I was waiting for Dan, and Dan was waiting for me. Um, so I think, like, not to repeat ourselves ad nauseum, but I think the successful response is one that's a planned response. And even if it's not what you'd love to see, is slightly different, but at least there was a plan that was carried out and it wasn't chaotic. Because I think, again, if things become chaotic, then people get hurt and people potentially put themselves at risk. And I think people in the campus can put themselves at risk by responding in ways that might be challenging. So, I do think that schools, again, that have thought out very clearly. I love the signage. If people can do that. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it could just be a little poster that says this is private space or what have you, or just a clear understanding from people what's private and what isn't. I mean, you could do a campus map internally and be like private or not, or something, just thinking ahead of what that is, and then what the state for your campus. Yeah, are you calling campus security? Are you calling general counsel? Are you calling the administration? Someone in the president's office. So just so it's very, very clear. And I guess for those that feel like they haven't gotten response, like I'd say, like at your faculty meetings, every time you have a chance, like, can you raise it? Be like, we need to know what the plan. Like, who do we call? If I'm walking down the sidewalk and I see a CBP officer or someone wandering the campus, like, who do I call? What do I do? So I just think, again, planning ahead and then encouraging your students to also to have a plan, particularly if you've got undocumented students or DACA students, or you know people with temporary protected status or pending asylum cases, anything that's somewhat less than an actual visa or green card. Those folks in particular these days need to have a clear plan, and and I'll find it. Dan's really good at posting stuff. I'm trying to be as good as him, but I'm gonna look up their Human Rights First actually has developed an app, and they're a really good organization. So like I trust them, but they have an app that people can use and like put in all their information. So if something happens, it's kind of like one button shopping. So like if something happens and they either get picked up or interacting with ICE, they can send out an alert to their contact information people, and then it has some of the information about them, for example. So even for individuals, even to support your students, your international scholars and students, for them to have a plan if something goes down, I think is just super helpful for everyone to like not bury their head in the sand and just be like, okay, how are we going to handle this? Because if it's ad hoc, in my experience, it just things end up going sideways, and that's not helpful.
Anything to add to that, Dan?
No, I think that's great.
Okay. Great, thank you. So a theme that I am seeing in the Q&A is a concern about mission creep. So could it be potentially possible for someone doing a J1, a normal J1 site inspection, then pivot over and try to gain access to a particular individual on campus in an enforcement sense? Or the SEVP field reps. I have an example of how that relationship has gotten more combative and there's a tension there. So, how do we expect to see those types of things happen, and how can an institution handle what should be a routine visit that maybe morphs into something more problematic?
So maybe I'll just start that one, because Carrie may have other thoughts on the internal interactions of different groups of DHS. But but yes, I think we have to treat visits to campus seriously, even if they were relatively friendly. Many of us have been through H-1B site visits. It really isn't I haven't had one that's been combative. Usually they're just trying to confirm that the person's doing what they're doing. Sometimes it's even just an email check-in. Person's often quite friendly. So I think you just want to realize that this is a government agent and they are gathering information and there's a question of consistency. Anything that's said there can be compared in the future at a green card interview or anywhere to something that is laid out later. And particularly with the tremendous amount of money that these agencies have, in part for AI, they're going to be comparing different things more. And I think we have to assume that we just need to be careful. We can be friendly, but we want to be careful. Carrie, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I thought
Okay.
so. I guess the one thing I'd say is so t generally speaking, the folks coming for like an I-9 review or SEVP, review, whatever inspections, are from Homeland Security investigations. And as a general rule, Homeland Security investigations has not been directly involved in standard immigration enforcement. I think in this administration, we've definitely seen, speaking of mission creep, some crossover, but I'll tell you a secret. It's not that secret, which is that HSI, Homeland Security Investigation, sorry, my cat's joining too. The Homeland Security Investigations really hates doing regular immigration enforcement. So I think unless there's like a particular person that they've been tasked with finding or some what they might call high value target or something like that, I think they're gonna still not be super inclined to be like snooping around and doing other stuff. So just to be aware that I would be prepared to Dan's point, and I would be cautious to Dan's point, and I would be clear, like this is your area and all of that. And if they ask permission, again, oh, can we go check out that dorm, or can we check out, to make sure there's a person there that is able to have the authority. And even you would be like, no, that's not my job. Like no, I don't think you can go there, but I can call someone. That they're there to say, no, we don't want you in these other places. But I suspect that, again, unless they have very particular um, orders. And again, we saw this a little bit with some of the First Amendment stuff that's been happening. But beyond that, I feel like they're not gonna want to do that, just truthfully. So hopefully they'll stay in their lane. But good to be prepared in case they don't.
Thank you. Appreciate that. There's been some attention given to Plyler v. Doe, and so uh, I have a question wondering if institutions should be concerned about that and if there is a concern about being perceived as harboring undocumented or out of status students. Could you address Plyler v. Doe?
Yeah, so I feel like that's a little bit of like apples and oranges, but so let me
Okay,
just
thank you.
address that. So Plier, yeah, that's fine. So Plier is the Supreme Court decision that found that undocumented non-citizens have a right to primary and secondary education, public education. So it actually doesn't even apply to colleges and universities. As a rule. There has been, you're correct, that I think there's been some discussion. I wouldn't be shocked if some in the administration have that on their whiteboard of things to overturn with SCOTUS. But I think that's not necessarily directly implicating you. And then the second part of your question.
Yeah, well, we do have some K through 12 institutions in NAFSA, so
Yeah.
that could be relevant for them. But
Oh,
just
okay. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
yeah, a perception of harboring, is does
Oh,
that
Harvard.
if it,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I don't know, Dan, if you've had any interaction with school. I haven't personally done much research on that particular issue. Again, I could see this administration with if there's a K through 12, K through 12 private schools maybe would be at slightly higher risk for something like that. I would say if any of the folks with us are in those circumstances, so you're in a K through 12 where you're doing I-20s, or you've got undocumented students that are there, might be worth reaching out and we can see if we can give you a little bit of specific guidance depending on the facts that exist in your particular situation. But I can see this administration because they've been so expansive and how they're, interpreting a lot of the well-established rights have, including birthright citizenship, for example, to try to make some hay of that. So I think it's not an on like a irrational concern, but I think I'd want to give it a little thought and maybe get a little bit of information about the particular situation before I would opine about whether I thought it was a problematic or not. I don't know, Dan, did I miss anything that you want to chime in on?
Let me unmute here.
You're
You're muted.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you
Yeah, I
go.
agree. I mean, this is a legal gray area, and in the Carrie and I had worked on a practice advisory for the for ACE for the American Council on Education, and during Trump 1.0, we did one in 2016, and it was good for the whole 4 years. This time we did one in 2025, and then we were asked to do another one in 2026 because it's just because things are evolving. But if you look on page 8, and I would consider sharing this with your general counsel because it is, anytime there's a legal gray area, you do want to let your general counsel know and let them evaluate. But not to get into the weeds too much, but the harboring statute, the law on harboring, does talk about doing things that actively help somebody hide. Either it actively helps somebody get into the U.S. or actively help somebody hide. Allowing them to be in the dorm, I think personally, I think there's a good argument that just allowing them to access your dorm and your campus is not necessarily harboring. But again, as Carrie pointed out, that doesn't mean that the administration might not make that argument. So definitely share this with your, especially page 8 on harboring, which goes through all the case law with your general counsel.
Great, thank you. As we begin to wrap up, I just want to point out that there were a number of questions received about things like training role playing, skills development, that type of thing, which I think may be out of scope for this particular webinar that's more focused on the legal aspects. So I would encourage us to continue this conversation on the discussion forums or within your regions to talk about how do we train our F1 students who work at our front desks, who may encounter folks. How do we inform our students, all of our students, without creating a very fearful or that type of situation. I think those discussions are absolutely valuable, and I think we can pull on our resources and our communities to do that. So, in the last 5 minutes, last thoughts before we wrap up. I'll start with Dan and then go to Carrie.
Okay. So I think that there was a last question in the chat
Oh,
that I
sure.
think, yeah, but I think what it really goes to is, what do you do if the government is asking you for more than what it says in the regulations you're supposed to provide them? Because this has happened. If you haven't had it happen, it will happen, and it probably will happen more. Again, you got to coordinate with your general counsel about any kind of institutional policy. But in general, I think you want to know what you're allowed to share and what you're not. And so if the regulations say that you must share with SEVP certain facts about F1 students that you have or J1 individuals that you have, that's what you share. And if there's more that they're asking for, I would want to be very thoughtful and not just respond because that's what the government is asking for. And I think the other piece I just wanted to raise, really quickly, that probably could be a whole webinar, is what do you do for what if anything do you want to do as a community for people who are off campus? Carrie and I were sort of batting around a situation where there was a grad student, an Iranian grad student living off campus. The FBI reached out and wanted to interview that person. Um, what what advice do you give, or do you just say, the person's off campus, I'm not getting involved? But that, I think, is going to be a more common situation and something you also want to make part of your plan. Carrie?
Sure, that's a nice segue. A couple just maybe caveats or pet peeves I just want to leave you with perhaps, which is that those of us try to like fix things when they go wrong. Um, Please, to the extent you feel confident, comfortable, or able, if anyone gets a call from the FBI, please have a lawyer, a knowledgeable lawyer, go with them. Because remember, it's a little like you really have to plan in for FBI, and this is what they do. And so even if they're like you're not in trouble, like it doesn't matter. Like their job is to get information out of you, and if it hurts you, they don't care, and they'll promise stuff that they can't deliver. And like it's really important that folks aren't willy-nilly talking to law enforcement. I had a Syrian client back in Trump one when they were very interested in the Syrians, and I begged him not to go, and he just thought it was super fun and went on his on his own. I almost had a heart attack. But the best you can do is try to, I think, advise them to get counsel, and I think that's really really important. And also, I know Dan joked about it a couple times, but a lot of the international students are like on Reddit or on social media together, and they sort of share advice that often isn't good advice. So one of the other things we are seeing, maybe in the wake of some of the CVIS, criminal student initiative program, is a number of students with criminal issues that have gotten notices of intent to deny. Likewise, if they could please get legal counsel. We had someone who got in touch with me. I said I could see you in 2 days, and he freaked out and filed it on his own and really did himself, I think, a lot of damage. And I'll tell you, I just had another guy who actually had a lawyer, didn't know what they're doing, unfortunately, respond to the Noid for him. He got an excellent outcome with the criminal arrest. His criminal lawyer did a super job. The case was dismissed before it was even arraigned, so like they didn't even get to the court really. It was super. And they submitted basically this like 10-page confessional, and he like went on and on about, it was some theft, some like shoplifting stuff, and he went on and on and on about all the shoplifting he did, and he was really sorry though. And they denied his OPT um, as a result, and indiscretion. And I think that's what's going to happen to the other guy too. Like he had a pretty good outcome on paper on his criminal case, but his confessional really, really hurt him. So please try and get those folks to experienced immigration attorneys. And again, like Dan said, a lot of us are doing work across the country now, especially because we can do video meetings with people and things are much more, less tied to a locality. Um, but it's really,
Thank
it's just
you.
important for people to
Oh,
get help when they can.
I hate to cut you off. We are at
No, no,
time.
sorry.
So I do want to be cognizant of the time for our participants. I want to thank you both so much, Dan and Carrie, for sharing your expertise. This is, some of these questions are beyond our wheelhouse. We don't have the legal studies that you do, and so your time is so valuable. And thank you very much. Thank you to the participants for being here, for submitting questions in advance, for engaging in the chat. I think everybody learned a lot based on the questions and the things that were going back and forth in the chat. Again, thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.